and clock collectors, and he has been since 1997. He's an expert on the inner workings of clocks and watches, and he's published 25 different technical articles on various horological topics. Today, though, he will share with us about a special type of clock, the Patti clock, and about the 19th century opera stars for which these clocks were named. So without further ado, Andy Durbin.
Good afternoon, and thank you Stephanie for the nice introduction. This is great. I love this church. Everybody sits in the back and nobody sits up front, but this is great. Today I'm going to be talking about operatic theme and Patti clocks in the Welsh and Spring Company. This was a unique partnership from these two gentlemen. And it's interesting because the one on the left is Elijah Welsh. He was really a businessman. He got into the clock business through his dad, whose dad actually made cast iron weights for clockmakers, and he worked for his dad. He actually peddled clocks for a while, and he was a very astute businessman. He was a major backer for a number of clock companies in Connecticut, and he actually was backing this clockmaker by the name of J.C. Brown, and when J.C. Brown went bankrupt in 1855, he basically owed Welsh so much money, he just took over his company and he turned it around and made it very successful. So he was a major clockmaker, a major manufacturer of many clocks. But he sensed that the clock market had different levels, and he was making the commodity clocks in that time. And so he formed a partnership with this gentleman on the right, Solomon Spring, who was a clock case designer. And their company was going to make a little higher end clock than the normal marketplace. And he sensed that, this would probably be a small opportunity, so they set up a separate company, this partnership between Elijah Welsh and Solomon Spring. So 1868, they started this company making, the first product was actually a calendar clock. And we think that may be a little bit odd today, but in the 19th century, they didn't have paper calendars. And so if you had a clock that would tell time and strike, and also added calendars, what's the day of the month, what day of the week, that was a real big plus, and it was a very, very successful seller. And many of the companies had lines of calendar clocks, and Welsh didn't have that, so that was one of his first product lines. And they had also some very nice high-end regulators. But then, about 10 years into the business, they decided, let's come up with they come up with a line of clocks named after female opera stars and composers, which were becoming very, very popular in that time. So they had an initial line of clocks, and then about a year or so later, they came up with a special line of clocks named Patti, who's actually named after an opera star called Evaline of Patti. We'll talk more about her in a little bit. So they were focusing on much higher level clocks, more expensive than the normal clocks in the marketplace. And so, why are they doing this? Well, in the 19th century, the clock making was centered in Connecticut. That's where most of the clocks you see, antique clocks you see today, actually made in Connecticut, in a very, very small area. But by the Civil War, the production had consolidated to about 6 large companies in Connecticut and 1 in New York. And these companies were actually factories making between 100,000 and 200,000 clocks. And they had men, women, children working in these factories. And so these were major companies. And so turning out hundreds of thousands of clocks. Now the Welsh and Spring Company was making small numbers of clocks. Now, because of this marketplace, every company was trying to find a theme to sell their clocks. They were trying to find basic designs, call them after different names to sell a line of clocks. It was very, very competitive. And so Welsh and Spring, they decided to begin using the opera stars, because in the time, think about 1880, there was no TV, no radio, basically no mechanical music. You had to go, if you wanted to see something, you was going to a live production. And so female opera stars became very popular, and they acquired the name of prima donnas, because because some of these ladies were, like some of the rock stars today, like Madonna and Lady Gaga, their egos were very high, and some had very tempestuous ladies, and this increased their popularity. And so they were all well known. You know, they toured in Europe, they toured in the U.S., and even small towns would build an opera house for these ladies to come and sing, and it was amazing. And also, in this same time period, you know, with the Industrial Revolution, many people became very wealthy, and they could afford, you know, a nice home, nice furnishings, and so there was a market for these higher-end clocks, and they were educated, so really they were kind of catering to this small market of wealthy, educated people. And so this is one of the first clocks they produced in 1878. It's named after Pauline Lucca. There's Pauline on the right, and there's a clock named after her. Now, she was an Austrian soprano, and she was born in the early 1840s. Most of these ladies are born 1840 to 1860, we're going to be talking about today. She toured in Europe, she toured in the US, and of course, like, as a big opera star, as she became famous, she was in London touring, she got tired of her husband, so she divorced her husband and canceled all the contracts, and went to the US and toured. And then she married somebody in the US and came back, and she ended up coming back to her native Austria, and she was with the Austrian Opera Society for many years as a big star. And of course, I'm not sure that it's cut off some of the text here, but each of these ladies had a huge fan base, and so they also feuded between each other because, again, there's a huge competition for these different plum Simons to sing. So she was one of the first big stars that they named a clock after. This is another lady, and I'm not even sure how to pronounce her first name. I'm going to call her Miss Paripa. She was born in Scotland, and she made her debut when she was only 16 years old in Malta. And most of these ladies made their debuts early, between 16 and 20, and she spent some time in London, and then she came to the U.S. and she got married. She stayed in New York for a number of years, and then she returned to London, and she was pregnant, and she died at a very early age, at 37, during childbirth, which is a very dangerous time in the 19th century. But this is a very unique clock. The Lucca clock, prior clock, you see them in clock shows and auctions, but I've been a collector for many years. I've actually never seen one of these Paripas in real life. I've seen one on eBay one time, but it was in bad condition. So it's a treat, even if you get a picture of one of these clocks. So she was one of the second ladies that they named their clocks after. Now this was another clock called the Titians, named after Teresa Tietjens, who was a German opera star. She trained in Hamburg, made her debut, and then she actually sang many years in London in the opera. And then she moved back to her native Germany to sing in the Berlin Opera, and she died very young at the age 46 from cancer. So she had a very short career. But this was a kind of an interesting clock. It's a beautiful mahogany case clock, and you know, most of the clocks produced in that time period were designed to run basically a week. So they would run a week, and they would chime, or strike, I should say. Well, this clock actually, though it has two winding holes, it actually runs a month, and it has a beautifully decorated movement. So you have this very unusual case style with a very unusual movement. So they actually did some interesting things with this clock to sell it. Now, not only did they name opera stars, they named some after composers. So this is called the Hanging Wagner, after the German composer Richard Wagner. And this is kind of an interesting clock because not only does it tell the time and strike, it has a calendar function. So this is an added bonus for the clock, and again, very attractive, probably a walnut case, but the calendar function makes it more utilitarian because it adds to its selling point to the public. So, and then the next one is named after Verdi, who was Giuseppe Verdi, who was an Italian composer. And this is sort of I think of more of a standard clock we would see in the U.S. I almost call it like a schoolhouse clock. This has sort of octagon dial head and then a sort of a drop. But this is sort of like what we saw typically from many school clocks. So it's really sort of a normal case style, not as attractive as the Titians or the Hanging Wagner. But again, they had a whole line of these clocks. And then one more that's now it's a shelf clock, who's named after a French composer, Daniel Franco Espiritu Albert. Now this was a shelf clock, but again, like the Wagner, they incorporate a calendar movement, and so it becomes again a little bit more of a higher end clock and a little more desirable, and it is a very, very nice case style. So that's sort of a little bit of a summary of what some of these initial clocks were made. Again, they were trying to tie them into people that were very famous in that 1870 to 1890 time period. Well known, Wagner's operas were very famous for many, many years. And then now the following year, they came up with this new line of clocks named Patti, named after Adeline and Patti, and the VP stand for visible pendulum. Now, it'll make more sense when I talk a little bit more about them. They also named other models after other opera stars, and the VP stands for visible pendulum. They got to have these fancy terms. Us clockers, sorry about that. But Adelina Patti was a Spanish opera star. She made her debut when she was 16 in New York City, and she must have been a smash because she was a sensation and was probably the most prima donna of that time period. And she had she married fairly young, and she had divorced. She had numerous affairs, and she sort of shocked the Victorian world with all her activities. But it didn't hurt her. It didn't hurt her. She made her even more popular. And later on, she settled on and married, and she had a huge castle in Wales, and she entertained lavishly. And there's pictures of her with her husband and huge parties. So she lived like a queen, and she thought she was a queen. And she was a very talented opera star, very attractive lady. And she actually, because she lived a long time, she actually made some recordings in the early 20th century with Caruso, and they're still available. Although she was probably lost a little bit of her voice, but it was an opportunity to hear a wonderful, wonderful star. So here are two pictures of Patti, Adeline and Patti. The one on the left is when she was fairly young. Again, a very attractive lady. She was one of the most sought-after stars of that time period. And the second one is on the right, is on a little bit later. So she's probably in her 50s, but she's still a very attractive lady, and she's probably dressed up for one of her party roles, like she did. So she was she was a huge star. And somebody told me a neat story about her. Is there was this one English promoter was trying to get her to sing, and she kept saying, "No, I don't want to sing for you. I don't even like you." And she was actually rude to this gentleman. And so the ruder she was, the more he sought her after to sing. And she finally said, "Okay, I will sing for you, but I want $5,000 in gold in my room before you go on the stage." Now, $5,000 in gold in 1880, that's like $150,000 today, and even more with the inflation. So, and the man went, okay, he forked it over because he wanted her to sing. So she had star power, so to speak. So she was well sought after. So they actually named two clocks after her because she was their key lead-in person. And I have one over there. And the first clock was called Patti No. 1. This was a rosewood case clock. Now, when it was introduced, it sold for $15, where the average clock in that time, wood case clock, was $3 to $5. And that would be a lot of money in those days. So they probably didn't sell a lot of them, but they were always sold to people that had a fair amount of money. And they also sold a smaller version of that clock a couple of years later. And not only was these clocks were so unique, these were all patented case styles, they all had patented movements. For this little tiny clock, they actually had two special movements that they were designed for it. So everything was designed special for these clocks. So here is the Patti No. 1 on the left and Patti No. 2 on the right. these are just, and these are extraordinarily attractive clocks. They're both made with rosewood. Now, rosewood is an imported wood from Central America. Today you cannot import rosewood to the U.S. It's illegal. It was banned in 1960 because they depleted the rainforest so much. So it's very difficult to even get. There is some rosewood as long as it's in the U.S. So they were using this, and the Salmon Spring love robots. So we created these beautiful clocks. So these are very complex to make. You know, you had to turn these posts and turn all these finials, and they're glass panels. So these are all put together with pinned and glued, and they're slotted. So these are, if you can come up with a design very attractively, but made it very difficult to create and assemble, he picked the clock. But they are very attractive. And then of course, the little Patti number 2 is about a 2/3 size scale model, and because it's so cute and so small, collectors really attracted to it. So actually, it's half the size, but it's probably 2 to 3 times the price of the bigger clock, because it's, again, made in small quantities, and collectors really fight over them to get them. And so this is the movement that's in these clocks, and it was, again, most companies in the day, they stamped their name on the movement. Well, they didn't have to. This movement is so unique. It has this kind of crossed X feature on it. No other clock movement is like that. It's got so many features that are so different. It's such unique movement. It was patented, even patented for this whole line of clocks by B.B. Lewis, who developed a lot of calendar clock patents. But he was a good friend of Salmon Spring, and so he designed all these special movements for these clocks. So, you know, patented case, patented movement, everything, very expensive and complex for these line of clocks. They even had a very nice dial that was, they were painted on steel, and they had these very attractive, they call them trefoil hands. So just a very, very attractive package, eye-catching package for customers. And that was the main thing. You need to find something that really attracts customers. What's really neat about these are these are those pendulums I talked about. They have these stamped brass, huge pendulum bobs, and in the center they put these sandwich glass inserts. They had maybe about 6 or 7 different kinds of colors, but in these clocks, they have the back is with a sort of a black flock paper, and with the side glass open, the light goes in. So these pendulums really stand out in the opening. So they're very attractive, very, very eye appealing. And you know, most companies put a label on the back to show who makes the clock, but they have this, again, different label. It's very ornate. It's black with gold lettering, so you have no confusion. Patti VP, the company's name, the patent dates, where it was made. So there's no confusion when you look at these clocks and the labels who made these, because they were, again, these were the creme de la creme of the clock of that time period. So that was the Patti number 1. Excuse me. This is the second star, Etelka Gerster. She was a Hungarian opera star. Again, she made her debut. She toured Europe. She made a couple of tours through the U.S. And she had a wonderful voice, and she was a huge star for a number of years. Then she retired, and she enjoyed she probably died about 1910, but she had a very nice long career in life. So the picture on the left, it's great. You can actually find images of these ladies on the internet. In this time period, they all had little posted images of themselves. They would use almost like business cards or trading cards. And then on the picture on the left, this is probably she is in a costume for one of her roles. So, and again, they would probably be using these as advertisements for upcoming shows. So it's great to see these are available. Sometimes people have actually collected some of their letters in amphorae from this time period. So it's nice. You can actually see the lady and see the clock. Because as a clock collector, I'm more interested in the clocks, but other people are interested in the stars themselves. And many of them are very, very interesting ladies in their own right. So here's the Gerster. Now this, again, he's making a similar line of clocks, so they used a lot of the Patti attributes, but instead of the sort of the curved top, they have this sort of a flat top and this railing around it. But again, very, very carefully turned. That's a lot of work making all those finials. They're all turned by hand on a lathe. And again, this was introduced at the same time as the Patti. Again, very expensive clock, and a very lovely clock. Again, made out of rose, just about the same size. And here's a third star that was very popular. This is an American, Annie Louise Carey, and she was born in Maine, and she trained in some schools in Maine. I think she may even come to Boston for a short time training, but they realized that this lady was very talented. So she went to Europe when she was about 16 years old and spent 3 or 4 years training before she made her debut in Copenhagen. And she toured in Europe, and she toured back in the U.S. In 1882, she decided she got married, and she decided she retired. She had her 20 years career, and I'm sure that they traveled and they probably lived well in hotels, but it was probably tiring. And so she retired. She probably had a good living, and then she just sang for a number of years for charity or events. And she lived into she passed away in 1921, and she was almost 70 years old. So she had a very nice long career and a nice life. In that time period, life expectancy was much, much shorter. So again, here are two nice images of Annie. On the one is again her I think that's probably what she really looked like, and then the one on the left is she's in her costume for one of her performances. Again, these are probably used for advertising purposes, but at least it gives you an idea of what these ladies look like. Again, these are probably when she was maybe in her early 30s. So here's the clock that's named after her, the Carey VP. Now, this clock is a little different. This is made out of walnut, black walnut. Well, black walnut is a native American wood. And it's a little bit taller than the Patti. You can see that if you want to call it the top, it's a little bit thicker than the Gerster. And you have a different set of finials. And we kind of joke about those kind of curved finials. We call them sausage finials. But again, they're a lot of work to carve, and they each has a little end cap, and so very, very decorative clock. Now, this clock also has one other function. This is also an alarm, so that little brass on the dial is the alarm, where you set the alarm and actually wind it through the bell. And so, alarms are very popular. That you also wanted to. That was another selling point, either calendar alarm, because again, people had to get up to go to work. They didn't, getting up sundown, sun doesn't work. You need to get up sometimes to go to work. So I'm sure it was probably very seldom used for an alarm clock, but they still added that feature in the clock. So those are sort of the first generation of Patti clocks, and those are the 3 clocks that are most seen by collectors or available today in the market. And so here's a nice little group shot. The Patti number 1, the Patti number 2, which actually brought a little bit later, and the Gerster. So they're very about the same in height. And here's now with the Patti, the 2, and then the Carey. The Carey's a little bit larger clock, and you see the contrast of the rosewood on the left and the walnut right. Rosewood has a little bit redder, richer color than the walnut, but still, walnut is a very, very attractive wood if it's when it's in this clock. And I'm not sure it's easy to see, but you can see on these, there's a very lovely, on the door, there's gold leaf, so it just adds a lot to the overall package with the clock, the dial, and the elaborate carvings on the case. So in 1884, the Wellspring Company is dissolved, and it's folded into the E.N. Welsh Clock Company. And I think most collectors would view the Welsh Company as being an artistic success, but probably not I won't say a financial failure, but probably wasn't as successful. But they were making a much higher end clock than the marketplace, and so they were actually working towards a smaller, a niche market, but an important niche market. So in this time period, they brought out another whole series of clocks named after opera stars. They even brought out a few clocks in metal and metal cases. And most of these clocks are very, very difficult to find. So this is the first of the second generation clocks. This is named after Sofia Schillaci. She was an Italian opera star, and I have one over there. Now here again, this is Sofia on her left, what she would look like, and the right where she was dressed for her in a costume. Now Sofia was probably, she and Patti had apparently a long-running feud. Who was a more popular star? So they were rivals. Like I say, each of them had their own camps of fans, and she toured. She toured the U.S. She toured Europe. She retired at like early 1890s after a nice 25-year career. She had her own little opera group. And after she retired, she had to have her one more triumphant tour, of course, probably for another good money-making thing. But again, she retired, and she had a good long career. It was one of the well-known stars of that time period. So here's a Schillaci. Now, this is again made out of black walnut. It's a little more austere design. There's no carved turnings on the posts. There's no side glass. What makes it a little bit nicer is that it has a porcelain dial where most of the clocks have a painted dial. And there's a Patti number 1 and Schillaci over the table if you want to go look later on. But one other thing that's a little different is that most of the clocks, the time period, they use a bell for the time or strike. And then in this time period, for some reason, they started using a coiled steel gong. It had a little different tone to it, and became more popular. So in this time period, they were switching from bells to gongs. They just liked the different tone to it. Again, something a little bit different. The next star was Christina Nielsen. Now she was a Swedish star, soprano. She was very talented. Again, she toured again the U.S. and Europe, and she actually sang for 2 presidents at the White House, President Taft and President Arthur. And she married in 1872. Her first husband died shortly after. She remarried, and she was a long time star. She had a nice, she retired, I think, in the late 1880s after about a 25-year career. And she had a nice long life as a star, and was well known in that same time period. So again, a couple of different views. I think one is sort of a pose picture. This is an interesting picture here when she's for probably one of her costumes. That's kind of a scary pose. She's almost like she's kind of glaring at you, but that must have been something for one of her roles. And that was in a picture taken in some studio in Paris. And here's the clock named after, called the whoops, sorry about that. The Nielsen. This is a black walnut case, and they have kind of made it a little bit prettier by the turn columns. It's a little bit taller than some of the other clocks, and it has all the same attributes. It's a little bit larger clock, but at least in the finial area, if you want to call it, the posts are a little bit wider apart, so it's a little bit lets more light through, so it's not quite as opposing or austere as the Schillaci is. But again, it's a lovely clock. I almost bought this clock at the show, and I thought, well, I'm not sure, is it right or not? And well, I've only seen 2 clocks now in 15 years, so I probably should have bought it, but I didn't. So.
What was the price tag?
What's that?
What's that?
That's a price tag on it, or it's a code on it, or something like that. And so this is a unique clock. This is called the Patti 7 Regulator, and most collectors call it the Patti Regulator. And it has, again, it's black walnut. It's about 4 feet long. It almost looks like a Patti number 1, which they stretched it, and you have accompanying finials down below. But it's a very unique clock. It has a specially designed movement again, which is weight driven. It's time only, but has a sweep second hand, so it's pretty unique. This style of clock, collectors often call it as a Vienna regulator, because there were long slender wall clocks were introduced in Vienna late 1800s, and they were produced in small numbers in Austria, but the Germans picked that sort of clock form up, and they produced these in huge numbers up until almost World War I. So oftentimes they refer to these long wall, and they could be anywhere from maybe 3 feet to maybe 6 feet long, in long slender cases with glass fronts, glass sides, and very high-end movement. So it has sort of that same look to it. But again, it's a very special clock. There's one coming up in auction next month. I'll be curious how much it brings. I think it's going to bring a lot of money because, again, it's a very unusual clock and not produced in very small numbers. So that was sort of the second generation of these clocks. And then in the 1889, they introduced a new third line of clocks. The Welsh Spring Company was beginning to, the Welsh Company was beginning to struggle badly because Mr. Welsh died in 1887, and there was such competition between all the companies. They were all making 200,000 clocks a year, so you're dumping in almost 1.5 million clocks into the marketplace, and so there was people were buying and selling clocks. There was all the jewels are selling clocks, and all these specialized stores selling clocks, and they were very, very popular. So they still were making clocks, but their themes now from stars more they were naming after operas, and they still made a few clocks with some different some metal case clocks, and even they made some clocks with marble case. They also started using a newer escapement called a jeweled visible escapement that was becoming popular at the time. So they were trying to incorporate all the latest clock fads into these clocks. So here are two of the clocks. The one on the right is called the Norma. This is named after opera by Bellini. And this is kind of I think, to me it's probably walnut, but it's kind of a plain case. But they've done some nice things that the bezel, where it holds the glass, is very decorative, and they have done some things with the dial is gilded, and they have this visible escapement just to make it, trying to make it a little bit nicer. The one on the left is called the Unani, and this is a cute little wall clock. It's only about 9 inches tall, and it hangs on the wall, and it has a very nice dentral, almost like a little fortress top, and they have some very beautiful carvings on the front of the dial, above below the dial, and some decorative turnings below. And again, it has this visible jewel escapement there. So it's a really neat package. And you really don't see too many of these, so collectors really like them. They're a very attractive little clock hanging on the wall. Again, another unusual clock called the Evaline. Now this is an oak case, and oak was used significantly in the 19th century later because it's a native wood in America, was available in large quantities, and you could easily work with it. And it was inexpensive, but it's not particularly attractive. So they've really done some nice things to make this case more attractive. They have these beautiful cast bronze feet that they almost look like a ram's horn. They have the decorative brass, almost looks like a bat or a devil there. I'm not sure. And then they have this decorative bezel, and then they've painted the center of the dial black, and then the chapter numbers are in white, with the numbers in black. So they've really tried to bring a lot of elements to make a more interesting looking clock. And a friend had this, so I asked him what it was. I said, "Is this an Evaline?" He said, "Yes." I said, "He let me take a picture of it because again, that's the first I've ever seen." So that they're not produced in huge numbers, and if you can get a chance to see these clocks, it's always nice to see an actual example rather than pictures out of a book. And here are two other ones. The one on the left is called the Kendive. This is named after an opera that's envoy. It has the Egypt individual. This has that fancy bezel with the visual escapement. It's made out of walnut, and then the Judica's on the right. Now this to me it looks a lot like the Scalacci, but they have a different top to it. And the top to me looks like it has sort of a little oriental theme to it. And for many years, we didn't know who this clock was named after. And it was only recently that someone realized that was discovered it was actually named after Annie Judick that was a German opera star. Someone thought Judick had to do with Judge or something, but it was actually a German opera star. So again, they're trying to find different ways of combining elements of clocks to sell them. So here's this close-up of the dial. So you can see this lovely, they call this pie crust bezel, and it's stamped out, but it really adds to the clock. And then you can see that the escape wheel's on the front of the dial, and it turns, so you can watch. Instead of, if you can't see the pendulum, you can see the pallets going up and down, so you know the clock is running. And this was a popularized by the Insomnia Clock Company, and so everybody else was trying to put this as a little bit of an add-on to add some, a little bit of attractiveness to the clock. And here are a couple of, again, some unusual designs. The one on the left is called an iron number 8, and it was an iron number 9, but what happened to 1 through 7? I don't know. But anyhow, this is a very small clock. It's about 8 inches tall. It's made out of iron, and they have sort of this reddish side. It almost looks like brick-like. And there's a filigree on the bottom, because if you have something black and you put gold or anything bright, it gives it nice contrast. Again, nice fancy pie crust bezel, and this uses the same movements in that number 2 Patti, little Patti. So again, I think I've only seen 1 or 2 of these clocks. There's one on eBay, and I'm going, and I passed on it. Dumb me, I should have bought it. And then the one on the right is called the Antique Number 1, and this is just an incredibly unique clock. You have kind of like an armadillo-like case, and then those legs are, there's like one is like almost like a ram's foot with a head and curved antlers, and again that attractive visible escapement with the gilded dial. So very unusual. I don't think I've ever seen any clock like this. This was an exquisitely done clock, and again, one very unusual clock. Now these are a little bit of a comparison of 3 different styles. Again, the Norma is the wood case clock, and the middle is called a Paola, which is named after an Italian composer, Polly. Now, this was made out of marble case, and what was interesting is, beginning in late, maybe 1885, the French began importing marble case clocks, and they became very popular. They basically had almost like a cement frame with thin slabs of marble put onto them, and they were very big sellers. And so the Americans quickly adapted that style, and sometimes they use iron, sometimes they actually end up using wood and to get that marble-like look to it. And so this is again a marble case, black marble, and where they have this decorative gilding around the front of the clock. And we have again black with the gilding. Really, it's very attractive. And again, the jeweled visible escapement. And the one on the left is that, again, very small iron called the iron number 9. Again, with some decorations above and below the dial, and again, a very decorative bezel. So again, they're trying to find all kinds of elements that were popular in that day to develop a line of clocks around. And so that's kind of a summarizing. I've kind of gone quickly here a little bit, but these pre-operatic, or these pre-Patti clocks are found in numbers because collectors like them. They're not as highly sought after as after the Pattis. But the Pattis are really special. Now, the Pattis, these are produced in much smaller numbers, so collectors they're really attractive. And the first production of the Patti number 1, the Gerster and the Carey, you can find them on clock shows and a lot of auctions. But then the second and third generation clocks are harder and harder to find, and they bring a premium. So if you want to bet them, you have to find out who has clocks and talk to them and dig into your checkbook to buy them. But if you ask collectors, Welsh and Spring Company, they all associate them with the Patti clocks because they were so beautiful and so well known, and people really enjoy them. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I'll be glad to try to answer any questions. We don't know every year. They may have come up with every few years, yes.
Okay, so did people collect number one, number two, the different ones, kind of like what we used to do with Beanie Babies anytime you had,
I don't know.
You had to have all of them. Did people collect like that?
It's hard to say. I don't know I'm sure what they did. They were very expensive, so I'm not sure they would have bought all of them at once, but maybe over time they bought a few of them.
Are expenses at that time, how much were they?
They were $15 a piece.
What would one of these sell for now?
Between $1,000 and $1,200 maybe. And the little one would be double or triple that. So.
Oh, the little ones are more expensive.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Because of the working.
Well, they made smaller numbers, and they're so cute that people go, oh, I paid more than for them. We have 6 of them. I've actually paid more, but things have come down in price, but they're still pretty expensive.
How long have you been interested in collecting clocks, and how many do you have?
About
When did you start?
15. A neighbor got us started. Got me started. Too many. My wife says too many. Probably about 150.
Where do you keep them?
All over the house. Every room. Bathrooms. They're in the bathroom. Except one bathroom. They're not a lot of one bathrooms.
Do they all chime in?
We only run about 20 of them or so.
That beautiful note on the black wallet case that was the 22-inch.
Yeah,
the one
yeah,
with the taller
yeah,
ones.
yeah.
What would that about roughly cost now if you bought it now?
The Nielsen, that's more expensive because they're harder to find. I know there was one in auction, and they would probably be about $1,500, $2,000 now. Yeah.
And how do you wind the Patti clocks? I saw the 2 gold holes.
Right.
I actually believe we have one up at our cottage.
Uh-huh.
It has the same exact
Oh,
front
sure, sure.
with the 2 gold holes.
Right.
And I remember it ding, ding, ding,
Yeah.
ding, really loud.
Well, the right side would be the time, left side would be the strike.
The time is straight.
I really wouldn't recommend running them because their movements are so unique, and they have strange spring arrangements. If they ever broke, they would be difficult to repair because people have never really worked on them. They don't. That would be the issue. Let them sit and look cute. Don't run them, or run them a little bit. But I wouldn't really. I know they have these odd spring arrangements. I was like, I just let them sit there, look cute on a dining room counter, dining room.
So you don't run your Patti clocks?
I don't.
Run the other ones?
Well, I run some of our other ones, yeah. We run a few of the most of the clocks we run are weight-driven, time only, maybe only about half a dozen strike in the house, so otherwise you go crazy in the hour time.
But they made new ones every year. Did people buy a new clock every year, or how did they?
Well, yeah, I think they would try to do that, but I think that there was a marketplace of, expanding. Other people died. I'm sure they would buy, not for every year, but they would probably buy a few, or other people would buy them.
I imagine most of these would be bought as wedding gifts, anniversary.
They could be.
That's why people would be buying them
Right.
each year.
Right.
They would be buying that as a gift.
Could be good to
to
gift,
someone.
could be.
And these would be very, very nice gift to give to somebody celebrating a 25th, the 50th wedding anniversary, or getting married.
Right.
These would be what I would think that probably why people bought them. And I should say, $15 was not what the average person would buy.
Oh, no.
So it would be a special gift where they would give it as a gift.
Oh, yeah, these are definitely special clocks, very expensive clocks.
The design on these clocks, you kind of see the design in the top in some furniture from the 19th or early 20th century.
Mhm.
Is it a particular type of design?
No.
You have, like I've seen curio cabinets or some types of chests, something a little similar.
Well, a lot of times they have the broken arch is a kind of a theme that they use. These are very different. I don't, they're very unusual clocks. I mean, these are, of all the clocks that were, there's so many clocks made in different, these are very unique because of the turnings. These are very complex to make because that was all done on a lathe by hand with a guy with a little you know, one at a time they made all these parts. It was,
I mean, like on the top,
right.
where that design,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where it's got those 4 sections in the center there.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if it's strictly strictly European, and it comes from some country, or some type of architecture, or it comes from...
You know, I don't know what his thoughts come. I mean, he was, Solomon was he designed many cases many years, so he patented he patented those case, these were his patent designs. So these were his original designs in the 1880s, so this was long before, 1870, 1984, so this was long before that, you know, these were, you know, this is 19th century designs.
By the time that they were making these clocks, I would think they would have the wood people that were making the cases, and then the clockmakers that made the actual working of the clock and the dials, because I don't think that the trade was crossed.
Oh no! By this time, these were huge factories, so they did it all in house. It wasn't, you know, in the 1820s there was a case maker and a clock maker. But this was all done under one roof. Now I think the movements may have come from someplace else because they were so special. But most companies had their case shop and their movement shop right there. They were you know, big operations. They might have, you know, because you can see sometimes they'll have like, they'll say, well, we had, you know, 200 men and 50 women and 25 children. So they had large workforces in these factories. Wellspring was probably was very small, but the other ones had huge factories.
What are these clocks worth?
Up each about $1,000, $1,200. Yeah.
I thought you were going to say a lot more than that.
Well, I paid more than that. But the market's come down a little bit. But you know, it's hard to find them. It's hard to find them. Some are always in good condition. That's the issue. So.
Did they at any point ever do pocket watches in there?
No, just clocks. They just did clocks. I don't think there were. Now there were a lot of. No, I don't think there were any theme watches at all. No. Well, they had a few things, but they didn't really have any. They did name, for example, companies have names. Watches were named after certain people. Like for example, the U.S. Watch Company had a Betsy Ross watch, and Hamden had a Stark named after John Stark's wife, Molly Stark. But they, as far as you know, theme like this, no.
Do they make any clocks like this today?
No.
Similar?
Well, you can get some. There are some Chinese reproduction of these clocks available. But they aren't as nice. But yeah.
Is it easy to find someone to repair these old clocks?
Yeah. Oh yes, a lot of people repair clocks. Yeah, I don't know how many I would be. I'd be careful who I would choose to work on these. But yeah, I get a bunch of friends that I can use to get clock repair. Oh yeah, there's a lot of people. Yeah, with less and less, but yeah. And watches is getting tougher to find people to do watches today too. So less and less. Me? Occasionally, when I brought over here, gotta be very careful on them anyhow. So. Well, thank you so much.
If I take our clock way up on a shelf, when we were little kids, we weren't allowed to touch it, and it has gold on the glass around it. But what I'm wondering is, we have a grandfather clock, and we were told never to move that because it would mess up the timing and the gears and all that. If I'm to take that off to look for a marking label or something, should I be really careful about moving it so it doesn't mess up?
On the grandfather clock?
On the Patti clock?
No, that's fine. No, just be careful. Just be careful. It should be. It's easy to move. They're very light.
And where would the label be?
On the back. On the back.
Okay.
back of the clock. We'll turn it on so you can see what the label looks like.
What are some of the other themes that other clock companies came up with? That, they came up with the operatic theme.
Well, Seth Thomas had a city series theme of clocks. So they had a clock for every city in the country. So they had a Boston. So I mean, and collectors actually collect those. And there's hundreds of them. Even at the small cities. So I'm sure that there was the War of 1812. The War of 1896, the Spanish-American War. They had clocks named after all the admirals. So there was a Dewey clock and a Simpson clock, and so whatever they could come up with, they did something. So anything to sell clocks. They would take a basic design and come up with 20 other designs around it. So because there was a market for them. So.
Is there a Michigan clock? I'm surprised they haven't tried to reproduce it.
I don't know. There probably was a Detroit. I'm sure the Stepton had a Detroit clock. I mean, Michigan had a huge clock industry in Zealand that started with a colonial manufacturing company in 1906, and there was 4 or 5 companies made a lot of clocks in Zealand, Michigan. Colonial, Trensly, now Howard Miller, Herman Miller, Howard Miller. So they were major. I mean, people don't realize how many clocks. That in the 20th century, clock making moved basically from Connecticut to Zealand. That little town of Zealand just poured out a huge number of clocks. It's amazing.
Were there any clocks that were made for like an inauguration that might be in the White House by any of these clock makers?
Not really. Now, sometimes Chelsea made some limited, Millennium clock, but nothing for. Well, there were. Seth Thomas had some clock named after presidents, but nothing special for like inauguration or anything. So probably everything else though. Well, it's been a great audience. Asked a lot of great questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you.